2024 has come to a close, and like many of you, I'm taking a look back at my projects from the year, and I wanted to share some of my most notable projects with you guys. So in this video, I want to take a look at 2024, all of my knitting. I'm going to tally up all of the projects by type. I'm going to share a few project highlights. I'm also going to give a final overview of my yardage tracker, so how many yards came into my stash and how many yards left my stash. And I'm also going to do a spending summary, which I haven't done before. In 2024, I finished a total of 20 projects, 8 of which were garments, and those garments were 7 sweaters and 1 top, and 12 accessories, which included 6 pairs of socks, 2 hats, 1 neck warmer, 1 pair of mittens, and 1 pair of leg warmers. I am not disappointed with my productivity this year. I think I tried to spend a lot more time making projects that I actually was excited about, and I'm really proud of a lot of the things that I made this year, which is a natural segue into my project highlights for the year. First up is going to be my most impressive knit of 2024, and that is going to be my book club cardigan by Sari Nordland. I would not spend a lot of time talking about it. I've made a dedicated video about it, and if you watched it, then you'll know all of the pertinent details. But if you haven't, I will add a card above for you to check it out if you're interested. Top tier finishing details, beautiful cable work, all over texture. And I think all of those elements came together to make a really well-made piece of clothing. A lot of people I work with know I knit, and if I'm wearing a knit at work, they'll ask if it's something I made, and they'll compliment me on it, and I don't mind that at all. But this particular project is something that I've worn to work several times, and nobody has asked me any questions about it. And I think it's because the assumption is that I purchased it. I personally think it's something that you could find at the store, but obviously you can't because it is handmade. The second project I wanted to highlight was my fanciest knit of 2024, and that is my holiday sweater for this year that I only finished a few weeks ago. It is the Yen sweater by Anne Fiscum Sunda. The pattern itself is very simple. It's a top-down raglan. It has some really cool ribbing details that go along the raglan, and it has a dramatic split hem, which I think is what sold me on making this pattern. I also have a dedicated video for this project too. If you want to know more, I'll pop a card up above. But this was hands down my fanciest knit, mainly because of my choice in yarn. So the main yarn I used was a worsted weight merino yarn from Pearl Soho that I frogged from a previous finished object. I held it with a sequined yarn. The sequins in the yarn are gold, and the thread of the yarn is white, and I think it blended really well with my merino yarn, but I also think it added a nice subtle sparkle factor that makes it really festive for this time of year. And I've never knit anything sparkly, so it felt really fancy, and I got to wear it on Christmas Day, and yeah, I was really proud to show it off. And the third project I'll highlight is my most challenging knit of 2024. This is hands down the Phantomist sweater by Wally One Knitting. I knit a version of this sweater for my husband. It was a bottom-up saddle shoulder construction, which I had not done before, and it also featured a zipper, which was totally uncharted territory for me. I'd never knit anything with a zipper, and I have to say, it turned out really wonderfully. I'm happy with the product, but it challenged me in a lot of ways. So I hit a few hiccups while making it, and I did have to do some sweater surgery after all of the knitting was complete to shorten the body. In the end, it turned out really great, and I'm so happy with the outcome. But I would be dishonest if I said it did not frustrate me at certain points, and the zipper process overall was extremely tedious and not an enjoyable process. I think the outcome was, of course, worth it, but when I was in the thick of it, I think it took me 3 hours in total to hand sew the zipper in, and it was just not a fun process. I would absolutely do it again because the outcome, like I said, was excellent. And lastly, my most worn project of 2024 is a pair of socks, a pair of basic ribbed socks. In general, I tend to find very wearable. I enjoy wearing all of my hand knit socks. It really is a shame because I set out in 2024 with the goal of knitting one sock a month. And unfortunately, I completely fell off the wagon in the middle of the year. So I only knit 6 socks total for January through June, and then radio silence on the sock knitting front for the second half of the year. I want to redeem myself in 2025, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a future video. But for now, I'll say this pair of socks was my last sock knit of 2024, and I have to say I ended it on a high note. The sock itself is very simple. There's nothing spectacular about the pattern. Whenever I'm knitting a basic sock that I'm either doing ribbing on, or a vanilla sock that's stockinette, or something with very simple texture, and all I really need in terms of a pattern is the instructions for the heel flap and gusset, what I always turn to is the I'm So Basic socks by Summerly Knits, and that was the case for this project as well. So for the pattern itself, there really isn't anything unique about it, but the yarn I used was the Lang Yarns Alpaca Socks. Was really what made this my most worn knit of the year, because the alpaca yarn blend, it adds the perfect amount of fuzz. I don't find it itchy. They are incredibly warm and cozy and just really comfortable to wear, and I find myself reaching for them over all of my other socks. All right, those are all of the project highlights that I wanted to share. And I'll close that out by mentioning briefly what I'm wearing. You might have been wondering about what I'm wearing. It is a hand knit. I did not knit it though. So one thing I did do in 2024 was a knit swap with a fellow knitter. She does not live local to me, but we've corresponded on Instagram and social media, and she's just a really sweet, down-to-earth person. Her name is Suman. She has a few designs of her own, one of which I did knit for the purpose of this knit swap. So I knit her a cardigan. She knit me this sweater, which is the Throwover by Andrea Mowry, with some stash yarn for my contrast colors here. And I ordered some yarn and had it mailed to her for this main color. And she did the same for me. She had some yarn sent to me, and it was really a successful experiment. I would definitely do it again. If you're interested in doing a knit swap and you have some knitting friends who would be also game to do it, I highly recommend. But this is not one of my projects from the year, but it is definitely easily top 3 knits for 2024. Now I'll talk a little bit about my stash tracker, my yardage tracker for 2024. If you don't know, I have been tracking on a monthly basis the yardage that has come into my stash and the yardage that has left my stash. And my overall goal in even tracking it is to ensure that I am reducing my stash over time. So you may recall that in 2023, I did a no buy where I cold turkey committed to not buying any yarn. I found it hugely successful. There were some exceptions, and I did bring some yarn into my stash, but for the most part, I spent the year not purchasing any yarn and focusing on knitting through my stash. In 2024, I lifted those restrictions. I did not commit to a no buy, but I did commit to continuing efforts in reducing my stash and just having less yarn in my possession overall, focusing on using what I have, which I find a bit more gratifying than going out and buying something and using the new and shiny things. And I think for the most part, this year was successful in that effort. I will say before I share the numbers that I think I could have done a lot better. I think a couple of things worked against me with this this year. 2 projects that I knit, my yun sweater, which I talked about in the project highlights, and I also made the citrine pullover by Emily Green. Both of those projects were with yarn that was not already in my stash coming into the year, but yarn that I frogged from previous finished objects to make them. So they didn't really move the needle in terms of my stash tracker, but they were obviously very large projects, pretty significant in terms of the commitment and the materials that went into them. It would have been nice to have those yardages included in my stash tracker. I think it would have changed the numbers quite a bit. In the end, both of those projects were really aligned with what I wanted to focus on, which again was using what I have, not turning to buying new things for projects when I have a lot in my possession already. But I just wanted to make that call out because 2 of my really big projects this year are not included in the numbers. So for the year in total, I've updated it through December. The total amount of yarn that left my stash in 2024 was 21,960 yards. Now, this includes projects that I knit from my stash, but it also includes yarn that I destashed without knitting. So I didn't knit 21,000 yards, but I did remove 21,000 yards from my stash. And the total amount of yarn that came into my stash in 2024 was 18,315. And the net impact is a total net reduction of 3,645 yards. So I achieved my goal of reducing my stash in the end, which I'm really happy about. But I'm really looking forward to 2025 because I think it is totally within my means to have an even bigger reduction next year. Last but not least, I'll share a little bit about what I earned and what I spent in 2024 relating to the hobby of knitting and crochet. So I'll start with what I spent, and I will go in order of the smallest spend category to the largest. First thing is the row counter app. I spent $11.01. I pay for the premium version and there's an annual fee of $11. So that's what that is, pretty straightforward. The second category, I spent $24 on a festival ticket. I bought a ticket to Flock Fiber Festival and I didn't go. It was a reckless decision on my part and I did not end up following through on those plans. So I did not book a flight or a hotel. My senses came back to me and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna pump the brakes on that. Patterns. I spent $81.20 on knitting patterns. Next up, I spent $98.25 with the United States Postal Service for shipping yarn. Most of the yarn that left my stash by way of selling to other knitters, those knitters did not live local to me and I had to ship them. Yeah, I spent $98.25 sending yarn across the country. I spent $120 on Canva. So Canva, similar to the Row Counter app, has a paid and a free version. I think for the first 2 to 3 months of 2024, I was operating on the free version of Canva. And not just this year, but in previous years, I was using Canva to make graphics for videos, thumbnails for my videos. And there were some features, particularly the background remover feature, that's only available in the premium version. $120 isn't cheap. I don't know if it's worth it, to be honest. I'll reassess next year. That's a sweater quantity of pretty nice yarn. I'm just saying. $293.16 on Adobe Premiere Pro. So that is the software I use to edit my videos. I think in 2025, I'd like to explore maybe some courses or do some more research on how to get a better use out of Adobe Premiere Pro. The videos I make tend to be very simple in nature and don't require a lot on the editing front. So perhaps it's not worth my money. Don't judge me, okay? I pay for it and that's my business. I spend $1,658.91 on acquisitions. So this includes yarn primarily, but it also includes any notions or other tools related to my knitting that I purchased this year. I have a big girl job and big girl money and I'm an adult. So judge me if you want to. Okay, so that is everything I spent on this hobby this year. It totals to $2,286.53. And let's talk about what I earned in this hobby. So I did bring in some cash flow that offsets a little bit of what I spent. First up is pattern sales. So if you didn't know, I have a knitting pattern that is published on Ravelry and available for download for $5. I sold 14 patterns and I made $70. I made $333.17 on YouTube. Ages ago, it seems, I qualified for the YouTube Partner Program, and I spent months and months and months dragging my feet on signing up for it because I am horrible at completing administrative tasks. Finally, I got my stuff together at some point in 2024, and I signed up and checked all the boxes, and I started earning a commission on the advertisements that run on my channel. I made $419.25 on D-stashes. So yeah, that $98 I spent with USPS, it was to ship yarn that other knitters paid me for, and I made $419 from that. In total, I had a net expenditure of $1,463.56 on my hobby this year. So yeah, now that you know all of my business, I don't know how to close out this video. I hope you had a great, prosperous 2024. I hope your crafting has treated you well. And I look forward to the time we will spend together next year. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.